Right, welcome back. And I'm going to ask Andrew to give his response to the wonderful meeting we've had today and all the different points that have been raised. But we will also, when Andrew's given his response, we will all of us get the chance to chip in as well. So Andrew, would you kick us off, please?
Thank you very much. I'm obviously not going to respond to every single point. That would take time. There would be time for the Morris dancing that Brendan do at the end. So, but obviously fantastic panels. I think they show that although we chose to do this on a territorial basis, which I think it was, as I think it's clear, was the right thing to do, because that's the funny thing about the UK, it's so distinctive, but there are some commonalities running across it with what I'm going to try and talk to. I think one issue that actually came across all of them, and certainly fits with things I'm interested in, is in different ways we're haunted by referendums that have happened and produced the wrong result or the right result, which way you look at it, and also referendums which might happen or should happen or will happen. But also, I think what recurs from all of that is that they're not really necessarily the answer. I think we saw, for instance, in the case of Northern Ireland, although, you know, as the Belfast Good Friday Agreement has it, seemingly a majority of one is enough to rejoin Northern Ireland with the Republic. We know that in reality things are much more complicated than that, and that would, as far as I can see and confirm what I heard today, that would actually be a disastrous result. You know, one or majority of one in either direction would be pretty bad. You know, would be so. You know, referendums there, and we saw the referendum in Scotland, 2014, far from resolving things, opened things up, and now you're having an argument about whether or not we should have a referendum again, how you're allowed to do it. So they don't seem to solve much really. And we saw that the North East referendum in England, 2004, certainly didn't solve anything. It just, various reasons, took too long to take place. Probably what was on offer wasn't much good. And well, not probably, definitely what was on offer in 2004 wasn't much good. And it was a real setback. So there you go, referendums, not really the answer. That leads me on to another point, is that we seem to be going round and round in circles in this country, although some of these problems seem to be new. The things we're talking about go back a long way, and the whole idea of devolution, or as it was originally called, home rule, the whole idea of a possible federal UK goes way back into the 19th century, really almost as, you know, not that long after the union with Ireland, we start talking about these kind of ideas, certainly from the mid-19th century. And they originally come onto the agenda, I suppose, of dealing with what was then called the Irish question, that we have home rule, but then if you're going to have home rule for Ireland, what are you going to do about the rest of the UK? And then the people who want to stop home rule from happening come up with this idea that we should have to have a referendum in order to before home rule can be enacted. So you get these arguments going round and round and round, and it shows how difficult some of these things are to solve. And there aren't quick fixes, there aren't magic solutions. That's why I think when we propose things today, we should be aware of this, that at different points in history, home rule was seen as an answer. The referendum was seen as an answer to lack of democratic engagement. These things have been tried, been floated, been argued about, been attempted. Sometimes they've helped a bit, sometimes they haven't, but there will never be one single answer to any of this. And today we talk a lot about things which are very good. The examples we've seen from the Republic of Ireland, of many publics debating things, all very useful citizens' conventions, but none of them will actually be the ultimate answer. And all these things to actually work depend, whatever system we've got, on goodwill from politicians and people being willing to work together. And I think certainly some sections of the political elite at this point simply don't want things to work in those terms. They're now in a position where they have certain objectives they want to get, and the rest of the system can just go to hell so far as they're concerned. They're not interested. And it's very difficult to know what we do about that. You've got to find ways of of shutting them out, really. You've got to find ways of it, because if people aren't willing to actually play ball and behave properly, then they don't deserve to be engaged with. But that's easier said than done. So there are those problems, and we do keep going around again. I was struck in the Northern Ireland discussion that we seem to be edging. We didn't get all the way there, but in the discussion, there seemed to be edging towards a discussion of what the constitutional structure of a united Ireland might look like. And I was reminded a bit of the 1920 Government of Ireland Act, which the idea they came up with that was you can have then it would have been within the context of the UK, but you'd have a devolved system for Northern Ireland and then a separate devolved system for what was then called Southern Ireland. And obviously, as we know, what happened in the end was you got the devolved system in Northern Ireland, which lasted for 50 years, arguably didn't work out too well for a significant section of the public of Northern Ireland. But obviously what was described in that legislation, the Southern Ireland didn't get involved in that. So the irony there being, as is often remarked, that the one part of the UK that never wanted home rule was the one that ended up getting it. But so that's another story. It shows that some of these ideas have been floated before, and so it's useful to be aware of these things and to be aware that they didn't necessarily work out. It doesn't mean that we can't look at them again. And I think the other thing which we just talked about now, which came back again, is that maybe rather, we used to talk about the Irish question a lot, and certainly a lot of what we're talking about today, some of these ideas first arose in the context of the so-called Irish question. One point to make there is that a lot of these ideas are often developed in response to a particular issue or problem, if you want to call it a problem. So a lot of what we came up with was a response to Ireland, what to do about Ireland. And then that kind of turns into, oh, but we're going to do it in Ireland, we're going to do it here, then, and you kind of grudgingly extend the whole thing. It doesn't really work. And now a lot of what's being proposed, I think, is response to Scotland. But I don't think that's the right way of coming at it, because if you're treating, say, a federal system as just a way of dealing with this particular part of the UK and making the problem go away, that's not the way to come at it. I think you've got to look at the whole UK and ask, well, what is the problem? Is there a problem? What's needed? What's going to actually work? And I suspect even now the fact that Gordon Brown's been given the job by Keir Starmer, how seriously what he comes out with is going to be treated by the Labour leadership, I still don't think is quite clear. But again, I think it means it's still to some extent being approached as a way of dealing with Scotland and a way of defeating Scottish independence movement, which as we've seen today, all these different ways of supposedly defeating the Scottish independence movement seem only to have made it stronger anyway. And B, doesn't really, if you tell people in England you've got to have a whole new system of government as a way of Labour dealing with a problem it's got with the SNP, is that really the basis on which to do it? I think we've got to think again about all of that. But also I think we've got to reconfigure it slightly as now what we're really talking about is an English question. What do we do about England in the constitution? And my personal opinion on that, and others may disagree with me, is that an English Parliament is not the answer. It's a distraction. It's a destabilising distraction. But also, I don't think it's actually going to happen in a meaningful way. Because apart from anything else, why would a UK government want to actually create a meaningful rival to itself? And it's not meaningful. Well, it's a waste of time. But are they really going to do that? Are they really going to create a Parliament and a government that's going to be obviously be quite serious? If it's got real power, it's going to be quite a serious rival to them. Apart from the fact that's a bad idea, and if it's not got any power, there's no point in it. But apart from the fact it's a bad idea, I just don't see any. This one of the reasons that House of Lords has never really been reformed in a democratic direction. It had lots of reforms, but not giving it really strengthened the democratic legitimacy. And one of the reasons there is that the House of Commons has no real interest in creating a rival to itself, so why would it do that? And I think that's why I don't think it's even going to happen. So apart from the fact that even if it could actually be a bad idea, I don't think there's much point talking about it. Also, I don't think it's really going to, deal with issues of decentralisation in England, and for those reasons, I don't think it's viable. So I think we've really got to think seriously about what does regional devolution and regional federalism within the UK look like, and ask ourselves some difficult questions, which was why I asked the question you were talking about earlier about how easy is it for people in parts of the UK to accept that that London, or dare I say the East Midlands or the South East region of England has some kind of equality within the UK alongside Wales, Scotland. If it can't, I don't see any other federal system that can really work. And we've heard talked a lot about the German model, and it's fair to say that within that system, although voting rights are apportioned differently, you still have a system in which, say, a city like London would probably be a component in the federal UK, or a city like, say, Berlin can be part of the federation. Artificial, in inverted commas, everything's artificial in the end, everything's created at some point, but more recent, I'd rather say, but North Rhine-Westphalia, and then you've got an ancient kingdom like Bavaria, all there as components, as states within the German system. So it's possible, it's been done. And so finally, on the kind of top-down point, well, I suppose the German constitution was created in circumstances in which they weren't fully in control of their own destinies at that point. So it can be done. It can be, I don't know if imposed is the right word, but it can be done in a situation where you're under military occupation. So it's possible to have that. So
you either have to win a war or lose.
Yeah.
But it's stuck.
It's stuck, quite exactly, and I think it's striking that they've made, whatever challenges they've been, they have managed to incorporate East Germany. It was one of the objectives of the constitution, was to be able to, and bizarrely, it actually worked. So yeah, so far anyway.
Right, thanks. Brandon. Oh, you do. Okay. Yes. Who would like to join in the summary of what we've done today? Yes.
I just want to agree completely about an English part. Right. On the basis of it, if you're looking at the United Kingdom as home nations, it's an attraction in the Parliament.
Yeah.
But once you're beyond that initial attraction, there are formidable problems. But having an institution that could really overshadow, not Scotland and Wales, that wouldn't be the danger. Yeah. It would overshadow the UK, and that's
the
highly destabilizing.
Yeah, and there's no federal system, as is often said, there's no functional federal system on earth that could work with that kind of balance in it, I don't think.
I'd just like to sort of remind everybody though that time is passing. The current system, in many respects, is pretty dysfunctional. What we haven't spoken about today at all are the regional differences in income and wealth, which are to be observed in the United Kingdom, which are much higher than they are in many other European countries. And I think that one should also consider what kind of constitutional arrangements should be made to try and narrow those gaps. In the context of Germany, again, there are actually constitutional responsibilities that the differences between the rich and the poor should not exceed certain limits. They also have arrangements where the lender have to sort of redistribute some of their funds to sort of help support some of their poorer counterparts and so on. I think that one has to bear those sorts of things in mind, and particularly because the system appears not to be capable of delivering the goods in the way that people have come up to expect it. Therefore, the question of how resilient is the current system, I think, is becoming more and more urgent.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, that within, yes, there's this territorial inequalities, which the Conservatives made much of, or well, they've gone quiet on it lately, but they made much of for a while, partly the areas where they're looking. But also, there's inequalities within London. In some of the greatest, in fact, probably the greatest inequalities in terms of percentage would be within London.
Yes, over here.
Yeah, so from some of the observations I've taken over the years, I've realized that if you try and impose regional government on the English people, they would never accept it. Whereas, do you think if we had structures put in place where district councils, county councils could work together and share budgets, that it could grow that way, so that people could see an example of how it's working, and then eventually you'd be creating a sort of regional structure?
Oh, there's another one. Shall we take a few more?
Yeah,
We'll take a few more. Over at the back.
Referring to that federal structure, Britain already had that federal structure hundreds of years ago. We had Wessex, we had Essex, we had Sussex. So it was areas. Those areas were later, when the monarchy and the barons, etc., disappeared, those areas were divided then into Cornwall, say, for instance, Wessex, Cornwall, Somerset, Dorset, Devon, was separated into separate counties. So we already have that cooperative structure, or had it. We lost it because we put everything into counties.
But those, when we had a heptarchy, they kept fighting each other. Mustn't forget that.
That's going back to the times of barons.
What's
Feudal
such a thing
times.
as Wessex hegemony?
Brendan, did you want to comment?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
say a couple of things. In Germany, it wasn't that quite the federal system was imposed upon them. They were involved in the evolution of it.
Yeah.
Now, it's certainly true that if the military government found unacceptable was being proposed, they wouldn't have allowed it. But the reason why it was easy for the Germans to evolve a federal system was that there weren't any stakeholders. Everybody had lost out. You were starting from zero. There weren't preserved interests which needed to look after themselves. People talk about turkeys voting for Christmas. I've never understood it, because Christmas comes whether turkeys vote for it or not, and they're not in a position to vote one way or the other. In this case, people don't vote for their own particular place in the pecking order to be unpicked. There's also the almost religious horror of systematic thinking about constitutional issues in British political culture. Well, they have this federal system in Germany. Well, it's bad enough that it's German, but in fact, it's even worse because it's systematic, because it's not realizing the genius of the British Constitution, which is precisely to deal with individual problems when they come up. And then we'll deal with the other problem halfway down the road. Isn't there a danger that our system has as one of its major defects that it can't reform itself?
You've got quite a few points of comment now. Do you want to?
First, as you say, the process of German constitution building wasn't, that it was just drawn up by the conquerors. And I suppose another interesting point there is they didn't have to have a referendum to make it legitimate. That it was the states ratified it. But I think it was a super majority, wasn't it? Or nearly all of them agreed to it, though, didn't they? So interesting. On the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, we're coming back to a foreign invasion again now, aren't we? I think it was Alfred the Great kind of unified all the bits that weren't under Viking occupation at the time to unite them against the Vikings. I don't know what lesson there is to draw from that, but it's an important point though. Again, but this comes back to the point that in the end, everything is an artificial creation. And England is an artificial creation, and those kingdoms before that were an artificial creation. And the Romans probably had something to do with the idea of Britain, and the Welsh are the ancient Britons. So I sometimes I think this idea of having things imposed, or probably if you go back far enough, most things were imposed on us that go beyond kind of your immediate surroundings. Somebody with more power above you decided you're within a certain unit, and obviously some units take better than others and have maybe more basis in geography and things like that. But there's always an element of artificiality in any of these things. So I think the idea of the kind of bottom up drawing down the powers, I think that's got a lot going for it. But I think it could take a long while. And if we do think we're in a position of urgency, if we do, then that might not be the way to deal with it. Also, it still doesn't, so although I think it's got a lot going for it, it doesn't deal with the problem of what you do with the powers at the centre and how you take decisions at the centre and how you involve the territories in the taking of those decisions, which is, I think, is maybe the key theme of today really, is how do you do that? You decentralise this power, that's fine, but what do you do about what's kept at the centre, and how do you involve the territories with their new democratic legitimacy in those decisions, so it doesn't solve that particular bit.
It could, though, if you had a written constitution, which is perhaps the thing that we haven't discussed today, but actually that's the way that the structural framework within which these powers are divided up and agreed upon, and people then agree to stick to it.
So it does seem to me that we were talking a little earlier about regional disparities and economic. And I actually don't believe you can deal with that until you have regional power. As long as it's a central government trying to solve it, it doesn't work. The United States, even when you do have regional power, and you take the United States model, where they already from the beginning had states and had a federal system. The Brookings Institute published a report some years ago. I was working on European structural funds, so I was interested in what had happened with federal funds in America, particularly following their Civil War. And the Brookings Institute estimated it had taken 100 years for the federal intervention to bring up the southern states to the level of the northern states. So healing regional disparities takes a while, even when you've got regional government. But when you haven't got it, I think leveling up is nonsense.
And I think if you did have this federal system that we're sort of talking about, you would have to have it included in some kind of legal instrument, whatever you want to call it, act of parliament, whatever, that was beyond the reach of any of the one components to change, i.e. the UK Parliament couldn't just change it again by simple majority voting. Therefore, whatever you want to call that, that's a written constitution. You wouldn't just have to call it that. I think often when people talk about written constitution, people are frightened it's going to be this huge document, all these different things. We're going to be arguing about this, that, and the other in it. Actually, it's better to simplify it. It's a set of rules that have got a higher status than other rules, and they can be enforced probably by a court, which is another tricky point because apparently we don't like that in the UK either. But also, you can't just change it by normal procedures. Once you've got that, then you haven't got parliamentary sovereignty any longer, which scares people. But that's what. So I think there's just inescapable that the thing that these rules are put into would have to be beyond the reach of any one institution to change.
Yeah.
If you have anything to learn at all about France, I mean, France is an ancient, centralised, unitary state and all that, but over the past 10, 20 years, is regionalised very extensively. And they seem to have grown, well, many of the social problems, well, they're slow and all that, seem to be, and infrastructure seem to have done better in French regions. They've all come up, and there isn't the disparity in wealth as there is in Britain. So I just wondered if we have anything to learn, in fact, from the way France has to some extent transformed itself into a more decentralised kind of system, while still having a strong central government. And I think their Conseil d'Etat, I think that is regional, their Senate, I should say, right? Not Conseil d'Etat, Canada. I think their Senate, I think is not unlike the Bundesrat. Yeah, I think it's regionally elected.
Well, I think it's indirectly elected, but it's local authorities upwards, isn't it? So it's not quite the same as I don't know how much power it actually has, but I suppose there's been a more general pattern of decentralisation across Europe, to which to some extent we're part of. I suppose the difference between us and France is that although they have minorities, they have the Bretons, they've also got bagpipes, they have the Basques. They're not given the status that Wales and Scotland. So there's a difference there. That's why it's maybe more helpful to look at Spain, perhaps, in some respects, I think. But it's certainly, I'm sure, I don't claim to be an expert on the French constitution, but I'm sure there are things to be learned. It's quite a different system in a lot of ways, isn't it?
I could add something to that because I worked for East Sussex County Council, and we negotiated with the region of Haute Normandy. We had a joint European programme with them. And some of their local politicians, I have to say they were more like full-time professional politicians than councillors were in Sussex. But some of them were in the Senate. And the result was, when we were negotiating for a joint enterprise, they actually could go to the Senate and get a law through, giving them the powers to carry out the joint enterprise. There was nobody in East Sussex who could do that. That just wasn't a possibility. It's very different. And the other thing I think, and somebody knows more about France context, but my impression is that it remains important to a French politician the place they come from. I think it's very important to their electoral chances as well,
Localism.
whereas we don't have that so much. Does anybody like to add any more before we wind up? Well, thank you very much for coming, everybody, and thank you, Andrew, for leading us. And I'd just like to, as you know, this is a joint conference organised by Federal Trust and the James Madison Charitable Trust, and I hope it's the first of many. I hope we will go on doing this. And I would particularly like to thank Ulrika and all the Federal Trust staff, both preparing it and coping with the technology on the day. And thanks to all our speakers, and hope to see you all again in another conference in the Federal Britain.
Good.